The morning mist hung low over the Serbian mountains when Milunka Savic received the intelligence report that would change everything. 3 enemy commanders had put a bounty on her head, calling her the devil in a soldier's uniform. She read the intercepted communications while cleaning her rifle, a habit she'd developed during her years fighting in the Balkan Wars and World War I. The Austrian and German officers had grown tired of losing entire battalions to this one woman's strategic brilliance. Major Klaus Brenner, Colonel Friedrich Weber, and General Heinrich Straub had secretly met in a war tent near the Serbian border, plotting her assassination. They couldn't understand how a simple peasant girl had become their greatest nightmare on the battlefield. Milunka had disguised herself as her brother to join the Serbian army, cutting her long hair and binding her chest. When doctors discovered her true identity after she was wounded, she begged to continue fighting. Her superior officers, amazed by her courage and skill, allowed her to stay. She had already proven herself in the Battle of Bregalnica, where she single-handedly captured 23 Bulgarian soldiers. The bounty letter detailed their plan. They would send assassins disguised as Serbian refugees to infiltrate her unit. The plan was elaborate and cruel. These fake refugees would pretend to need help, and when Milunka showed her characteristic kindness to civilians, they would strike. The commanders had studied her personality, knowing she never turned away people in need. What the enemy commanders didn't know was that Milunka had her own network of informants. Local villagers who had been helped by her unit would risk their lives to bring her information. An old woman named Giovanna had overheard German soldiers talking in a tavern about the assassination plot. She walked 15 miles through dangerous territory to warn the woman who had saved her grandson from enemy fire. Milunka sat in her tent that evening, studying maps and thinking about her next move. She had survived hand-to-hand combat, artillery shells, and poison gas attacks. But this was different. This was personal. The enemy commanders wanted her dead not because of strategic importance, but because she had humiliated them repeatedly on the battlefield. Her fellow soldiers noticed the change in her demeanor. Sergeant Peter Milic, who had fought alongside her for 3 years, saw the calculating look in her eyes. She was planning something, and he knew from experience that when Milunka planned, the enemy suffered. She had that same expression before the Battle of Kolubara, where she led a charge that broke through enemy lines and captured an entire supply depot. As night fell over the Serbian camp, Milunka made a decision that would define the final months of the war. She wouldn't wait for the assassins to come to her. She would hunt down the 3 commanders who dared to plot her death. She would end this war by eliminating the strategic masterminds who had prolonged the suffering of her people. The peasant girl who had become a legendary soldier was about to become something even more dangerous, a hunter with a personal mission. She cleaned her weapons one more time, checking every bullet and blade. Tomorrow, she would begin the most dangerous campaign of her military career. Milunka spent 3 days studying everything she could learn about her 3 targets. Major Klaus Brenner commanded the Eastern Front artillery units and had a weakness for expensive wine. Colonel Friedrich Weber controlled supply lines and visited forward positions every Tuesday to inspect his troops. General Heinrich Straub, the mastermind behind the assassination plot, rarely left his heavily fortified headquarters but had one vulnerability: his obsession with collecting war trophies. The Serbian intelligence network, impressed by Milunka's request for detailed information about enemy commanders, provided her with everything they had gathered over months of surveillance. Brenner drank French wine every evening at exactly 7 o'clock in his command tent. Weber traveled the same route each Tuesday, stopping at 3 specific checkpoints. Straub displayed captured Serbian medals and weapons in his private quarters, and he personally inspected any unusual trophy brought to him. Milunka knew she couldn't simply march into enemy territory and attack 3 heavily guarded commanders. She needed to be smarter than they were, more cunning than their security measures, and more patient than their expectations. She decided to use their own prejudices against them. They saw her as just a woman pretending to be a soldier. They couldn't imagine that she might be the one hunting them. Her first step was recruiting help from an unexpected source. Maria Bochkareva, a Russian female soldier who had gained fame in the Women's Battalion of Death, had recently arrived in Serbia as part of a military exchange program. The 2 women warriors recognized something in each other immediately. Maria had also faced discrimination and death threats from enemy commanders who couldn't accept that women could be effective soldiers. Together, they developed a three-phase plan that would eliminate each target using different methods. For Major Brenner, they would use poison disguised as his favorite wine. For Colonel Weber, they would stage an ambush during his weekly inspection route. For General Straub, they would use his trophy obsession to get close enough for a personal confrontation. The plan required perfect timing and flawless execution. They would have only one chance at each target. If they failed with any of the three commanders, the others would increase security and might escape entirely. Worse, failure would confirm to the enemy that Milunka was actively hunting them, turning her from hunted to hunter and back to hunted again. Milunka spent hours each day practicing with different weapons and disguises. She learned to move silently through enemy territory, to imitate the dialect of Austrian peasants, and to forge German military documents. Maria taught her Russian, techniques for close combat assassination, and how to blend explosive materials that wouldn't be detected by casual inspection. The two women also prepared contingency plans for every possible scenario. If Milunka was captured, Maria would continue the mission alone. If Maria was killed, Milunka would complete all three assassinations herself. They both wrote letters to their families, knowing this mission might be their last. As they finalized their preparations, word came from Serbian headquarters that the fake refugees had been spotted entering Serbian territory. The enemy assassination plot was moving forward. Time was running short. Milunka and Maria would have to begin their hunt immediately, before the enemy assassins could complete their mission. On the night before they departed, Milunka looked at her reflection in a small mirror. The peasant girl who had joined the army to honor her brother's memory had become something she never expected. She was no longer fighting just for Serbia or for freedom. She was fighting for her right to exist, to prove that women could be warriors and to end the war that had already cost too many lives. The hunter was ready. The prey had no idea what was coming for them. Milunka's first target was Major Klaus Brenner, the artillery commander whose cannons had killed hundreds of Serbian soldiers and civilians. She studied his daily routine for a week from a hidden position near his camp. Every evening at 7 o'clock, Brenner would dismiss his guards and retire to his personal tent with a bottle of expensive French wine. He believed his position behind enemy lines made him safe from Serbian retaliation. The plan required Milunka to pose as the daughter of a French wine merchant whose family had been displaced by the war. She spent 2 days practicing her French accent and learning about wine regions that Brenner particularly enjoyed. Maria helped her create false papers claiming she was seeking to sell her late father's remaining wine collection to German officers before fleeing to Switzerland. Disguised in a worn but elegant dress, with her hair styled in French fashion, Milunka approached the German checkpoint carrying a wooden crate containing 6 bottles of genuine French wine. The soldiers at the checkpoint were suspicious at first, but when she produced her forged papers and spoke in fluent French about her family's vineyard in Bordeaux, they began to believe her story. The checkpoint commander, a young lieutenant who appreciated fine wine, examined the bottles carefully. They were authentic, expensive, and exactly the type that officers of Brenner's rank would covet. When Milunka mentioned that Major Brenner had been recommended as a potential buyer by another officer, the lieutenant immediately escorted her to the artillery camp. Major Brenner was intrigued by the unusual visitor. Few civilians managed to reach his position, and none had offered him premium French wine. He examined Milunka carefully, noting her nervous demeanor and authentic accent. She played the role perfectly, appearing frightened and desperate to sell her father's wine collection before enemy forces could confiscate it. What Brenner didn't know was that one bottle in the collection contained a special ingredient. Milunka had spent days working with a Serbian chemist to create a poison that would take effect exactly 30 minutes after consumption. The poison was tasteless, odorless, and would cause symptoms that resembled a heart attack. The bottle containing the poison was marked with a tiny scratch that only Milunka could identify. She presented the wines to Brenner with the practiced expertise of someone who had grown up around vintages. She described the subtle differences between each bottle, the years they were produced, and the specific characteristics that made them valuable. Brenner was impressed by her knowledge and agreed to purchase 3 bottles, including the one containing the poison. As part of the sale, Milunka offered to open one bottle so Brenner could verify its quality. She deliberately chose the poisoned bottle, explaining that it was the finest in the collection. Brenner, eager to taste the expensive wine and show off his refined palate to his subordinates, agreed immediately. She poured the wine into Brenner's personal silver goblet, the one he had taken from a Serbian officer he had killed in battle. As he raised the cup to his lips, Milunka felt a moment of doubt. Once he drank the wine, there would be no turning back. But then she remembered the Serbian villages his artillery had destroyed, the children who had died from his bombardments. Brenner took a long, appreciative sip and nodded his approval. The wine was indeed excellent. He purchased all 6 bottles and invited Milunka to share dinner with his staff, impressed by her sophistication and wine expertise. She politely declined, claiming she needed to reach the Swiss border before nightfall. As she left the artillery camp with payment for the wine, Milunka checked her pocket watch. In 25 minutes, Major Klaus Brenner would begin experiencing chest pains. In 30 minutes, he would be dead. She walked quickly toward the checkpoint, maintaining her role as a frightened refugee until she was safely back in Serbian territory. The news of Brenner's sudden death from an apparent heart attack reached Serbian intelligence the next morning. Enemy morale at the artillery positions collapsed without their experienced commander. Milunka allowed herself a moment of satisfaction before turning her attention to the second target. Colonel Friedrich Weber would be much more difficult to eliminate, but Milunka had learned something important from her success with Brenner. The enemy's arrogance was their greatest weakness. They couldn't imagine that a woman could outwit their security measures and strike at the heart of their command structure. Colonel Friedrich Weber's death would require a completely different approach. Unlike Major Brenner, who enjoyed his privacy, Weber was always surrounded by guards during his weekly inspection tours. He traveled with a full escort of 12 soldiers and followed the same route every Tuesday, believing that routine inspections kept his supply lines secure and his troops disciplined. Milunka and Maria spent 5 days studying Weber's inspection route. They identified 3 possible ambush points where the road narrowed between rocky hills, making it difficult for the colonel's escort to maneuver or call for reinforcements. The third location, near a small bridge over a mountain stream, offered the best tactical advantages for a 2-person assault team. The plan was complex and dangerous. Maria would position herself on the eastern hill with a rifle, creating the impression of a larger attacking force. Milunka would hide beneath the bridge with explosives, waiting for Weber's vehicle to cross. When the convoy stopped to deal with Maria's sniper fire, Milunka would detonate the charges, destroying the bridge and Weber's vehicle simultaneously. On Tuesday morning, they took their positions before dawn. Maria had painted her face with mud and wore a Serbian army uniform, making her easily identifiable as a Serbian soldier to create the right impression. Milunka crouched in the cold water beneath the bridge, holding the detonation device and watching for Weber's approaching convoy. At exactly 10:30, Weber's vehicles appeared on the mountain road. His black staff car led the convoy, followed by 2 trucks carrying supplies and his personal guard detail. Weber sat in the front passenger seat, studying maps and making notes about supply distribution. He had no idea that 2 women warriors had spent a week planning his death. As the convoy approached the bridge, Maria fired her first shot, deliberately missing but close enough to alert the guards. The vehicle stopped immediately, and soldiers jumped out to take defensive positions. Weber's driver began reversing the staff car, following standard protocol for convoy attacks, but the narrow mountain road made quick escape impossible. Maria fired 3 more shots from different positions, making it appear that multiple Serbian soldiers were attacking from the eastern hill. Weber's guards returned fire while trying to locate the attackers. The colonel himself grabbed his pistol and began shouting orders, coordinating his men's response to what he believed was a desperate Serbian ambush. What Weber didn't realize was that Milunka was waiting directly below him. As his staff car stopped on the bridge, she could hear his voice through the wooden planks. She recognized his German accent from intelligence briefings and knew this was her moment. She had attached enough explosives to collapse the entire bridge section, ensuring that Weber's vehicle would fall into the rocky stream below. But as Milunka prepared to trigger the explosion, she heard something unexpected. Weber was talking to his driver about his family, showing him a photograph of his wife and young daughter back in Germany. For a moment she hesitated, remembering that even enemy commanders were human beings with families who loved them. Then Maria's voice echoed in her memory. He chose to command supply lines that starve Serbian children. His family's grief will not bring back the families he has destroyed. Milunka steeled herself and pressed the detonation button. The explosion was massive, sending wooden planks and stone blocks flying in all directions. Weber's staff car plunged into the stream, crushing the colonel instantly. The noise echoed through the mountains, masking Maria's retreat from her sniper position. By the time Weber's surviving guards realized what had happened, both women had disappeared into the Serbian wilderness. The destruction of the bridge also cut off the main supply route to 3 German positions, forcing them to rely on longer, more dangerous paths through territory controlled by Serbian forces. Weber's death created immediate logistical problems that would weaken the German war effort in the region for months. As Milunka and Maria regrouped at their hidden camp that evening, they received intelligence that General Heinrich Straub had increased security around his headquarters. Weber's death had made him paranoid, but it had also made him more determined to complete the assassination plot against Milunka. The fake refugees were still moving toward Serbian positions, carrying weapons and orders to kill the woman who had now eliminated 2 of his fellow commanders. Milunka cleaned her weapons and checked her remaining explosives. General Straub would be the most dangerous target, but also the most important. He was the strategic mastermind behind many German operations in the region. His death might not only save her own life, but could potentially end the war months earlier than expected. The final hunt was about to begin, and this time Milunka would face her most cunning and dangerous opponent yet. General Heinrich Straub was the most dangerous of the 3 targets, and Milunka knew that approaching his heavily fortified headquarters would be nearly impossible through conventional means. The German general surrounded himself with elite guards, moved unpredictably between secure locations, and had increased security after learning about the deaths of Brenner and Weber. But Straub had one weakness that Milunka could exploit: his obsession with collecting war trophies from defeated enemies. Intelligence reports revealed that Straub personally examined every unusual weapon, medal, or artifact brought to him by his soldiers. He displayed the most interesting pieces in his private quarters, treating them like prizes in a hunting lodge. Serbian officers who had been captured and later escaped described seeing Serbian military decorations, Russian swords, and French helmets arranged throughout Straub's personal rooms. Milunka's plan was audacious and required perfect acting ability. She would pose as a German soldier who had captured something extraordinary: the personal weapons and medals of the legendary Serbian female soldier that Straub desperately wanted to kill. She would claim to have found these items after a skirmish where the Serbian warrior had been wounded and forced to abandon her equipment. The plan required authentic Serbian military items that would convince Straub of their legitimacy. Milunka made the painful decision to use some of her own medals and weapons as bait. She gathered her Order of the Karageorgia Star, her medal for bravery, and her personal combat knife, along with her blood-stained uniform shirt from a recent battle. These items would be irresistibly attractive to Straub's collecting obsession. Maria helped Milunka acquire a German uniform that fit properly and forged documents identifying her as Corporal Hans Müller, a reconnaissance soldier attached to Weber's former supply unit. They practiced her German accent and military bearing until she could pass casual inspection by German soldiers. The disguise was more challenging than her previous personas because German military culture demanded precise behavior and speech patterns. Getting close to Straub's headquarters required Milunka to pass through multiple security checkpoints. She claimed to be delivering Weber's personal effects after his death, while also carrying the captured Serbian trophies. The story provided a reasonable explanation for why a supply unit soldier would be traveling to see the general personally. At each checkpoint, guards examined her papers and questioned her about Weber's death and the circumstances of finding the Serbian trophies. Milunka answered with practiced confidence, describing a fictional battle where Serbian forces had been driven back, leaving behind equipment and wounded soldiers. She claimed to have personally pursued the fleeing Serbian female warrior and found her abandoned gear near a mountain stream. When Milunka finally reached Straub's inner compound, she was subjected to the most thorough security check yet. Guards searched her thoroughly, examined every item in her pack, and questioned her extensively about her unit, her commanders, and her recent activities. The Serbian medals and weapons passed inspection because they were authentic. Items that matched intelligence descriptions of equipment used by Serbian forces. General Straub agreed to see her personally after hearing about the Serbian female soldiers' captured equipment. He was a tall, imposing man with cold blue eyes and scars from earlier battles. His private quarters were indeed filled with war trophies, displaying captured weapons and medals from multiple enemy nations. He examined each item Milunka presented with the intensity of a scholar studying ancient artifacts. What Straub didn't know was that Milunka had modified one of the weapons she brought as a trophy. Her combat knife had been altered to contain a small explosive charge in the handle, triggered by a hidden mechanism that she could activate while demonstrating how Serbian soldiers used the weapon. The explosion would be small but deadly at close range, eliminating Straub while giving her a chance to fight her way out of the compound. As Straub examined the blood-stained uniform shirt, he asked detailed questions about the battle where it was supposedly found. Milunka described fictional tactical movements and casualty numbers, drawing on her real combat experience to make the story convincing. Straub was impressed by the soldier's detailed knowledge and began to believe that he was finally close to acquiring trophies from his most hated enemy when Straub picked up the modified combat knife to examine its craftsmanship. Milunka knew her moment was approaching. She would need to get close enough to activate the hidden trigger mechanism while positioning herself to survive the explosion and fight her way out of the heavily guarded compound. The most dangerous part of her entire mission was about to begin. She was standing in the heart of enemy territory, surrounded by elite guards face to face with the man who had plotted her assassination. Success would require split-second timing, nerves of steel, and a willingness to risk everything on a single moment of perfect execution. As General Straub held Milunka's modified combat knife, examining its Serbian military markings, she realized that something had gone wrong. The general's expression had changed from curiosity to suspicion. His cold blue eyes studied her face more carefully, and she saw recognition beginning to dawn. Somehow, despite her perfect disguise and flawless German accent, Straub was starting to suspect her true identity. The reason became clear when Straub spoke in Serbian, testing her reaction. "You fight with great skill for someone so young," he said, watching her face intently. Milunka maintained her composure and responded in German, claiming not to understand his words. But Straub smiled coldly and continued his test, describing details about Serbian military tactics that only someone with extensive combat experience would recognize. Straub had suspected a trap from the moment she arrived. The deaths of Brenner and Weber within days of each other had convinced him that Serbian forces were conducting targeted assassinations of German commanders. When a soldier appeared claiming to have captured equipment from the legendary Serbian female warrior, Straub's paranoia had immediately been triggered, but Straub had allowed the meeting to continue because he wanted to confirm his suspicions and capture his greatest enemy alive. He had positioned additional guards outside his quarters and prepared a trap of his own. If this soldier was indeed the Serbian warrior, he would finally have his revenge for the humiliation she had caused his forces. Milunka realized her situation was desperate, but not hopeless. She was still holding her detonation device hidden in her palm, and Straub was still examining the knife containing the explosive charge. If she could activate the mechanism and position herself correctly, she might still complete her mission and escape in the confusion that would follow. Straub set the knife down on his desk and walked to a wall cabinet containing captured Serbian flags and uniforms. He pulled out a familiar-looking uniform and held it up for comparison with the blood-stained shirt Milunka had brought. The uniform was identical in every detail, including specific damage patterns from previous battles. Straub had been collecting intelligence about her for months, gathering detailed information about her equipment and tactics. "The problem with your story, Corporal Muller," Straub said, returning to German, "is that this uniform shirt could only have come from one person, and that person would never abandon her equipment voluntarily." He walked slowly back toward his desk, his hand moving toward the pistol on his belt. "She would only leave these items behind if she were dead, or if she were standing here in my office wearing a German uniform." Milunka knew she had seconds before Straub drew his weapon or called for guards. She lunged toward the desk where the modified knife lay. activating the hidden trigger as she moved. The small explosion would occur in exactly 3 seconds, giving her just enough time to take cover behind Straub's heavy wooden desk. But Straub had anticipated her move. As she reached for the knife, he grabbed her wrist and twisted it painfully, forcing her to drop the detonation device. They struggled over the weapon as the seconds ticked by. Milunka used her combat training to break free from his grip, but Straub was larger and stronger than her previous opponents. The explosion went off while they were still fighting over the desk. The blast was smaller than Milunka had hoped, damaging Straub's trophy collection but not killing him instantly. However, the noise and smoke created the confusion she needed. She grabbed a captured Serbian sword from the wall and turned to face Straub, who had drawn his pistol and was aiming it at her heart. "So you are the famous Serbian devil," Straub said, blood running from a cut on his forehead, caused by flying debris. "You've cost me 2 good commanders and hundreds of soldiers. But your luck has finally run out." He kept his pistol trained on her while reaching for a bell that would summon his guards. Milunka knew this was her last chance. She had trained for sword fighting since childhood, and the captured Serbian blade felt natural in her hands. If she could close the distance before Straub could fire accurately, she might still win this deadly confrontation. "My luck," Milunka replied, finally speaking in Serbian. "I don't rely on luck, General. I rely on skill, determination, and the knowledge that I'm fighting for something greater than personal glory." She raised the sword and prepared for the most important battle of her life. The final confrontation between the hunter and her prey was about to determine not only who would survive, but potentially the outcome of the entire war. The sword fight between Milunka and General Straub lasted less than 2 minutes, but it would be remembered as one of the most decisive personal combats of the entire war. Straub fired his pistol twice, but Milunka's rapid movements and the smoke from the explosion made accurate shooting impossible. She closed the distance between them with the speed and precision of a trained warrior, using furniture and trophy displays as cover. When Milunka's sword finally found its target, Straub fell among his collection of captured weapons, defeated by the very enemy he had tried so hard to destroy. The irony was not lost on her as she stood over the body of the general who had plotted her assassination. His obsession with collecting trophies from defeated enemies had become the instrument of his own destruction. But Milunka's mission was far from over. The explosion and gunshots had alerted Straub's guards, and she could hear soldiers running toward the general's quarters. She had perhaps 30 seconds before armed guards would break down the door and trap her in the room. Her escape plan required reaching a window that overlooked the compound's rear wall, where Maria was supposed to be waiting with horses and covering fire. She grabbed several important documents from Straub's desk, including maps showing German troop positions and supply routes. These intelligence materials would be invaluable to Serbian military planners. As guards began pounding on the door, Milunka shot out the window with Straub's pistol and climbed through the opening. Maria's covering fire from the hillside beyond the compound kept the guards pinned down long enough for Milunka to reach the rear wall. The 2 women escaped on horseback, racing through the mountain forest while German soldiers organized pursuit parties. They had accomplished something unprecedented, a 2-person mission that eliminated 3 enemy commanders and struck fear into the heart of the German military. Leadership. The intelligence documents Milunka captured from Straub's office revealed that the fake refugee assassins were scheduled to reach Serbian positions in 2 days. Serbian military commanders used this information to set up a counter-ambush that captured the entire assassination team alive. Under interrogation, the captured assassins provided details about other German covert operations planned against Serbian forces. News of the 3 commanders' deaths spread quickly through both armies. German morale plummeted as soldiers realized that even their highest-ranking officers weren't safe from Serbian retaliation. The deaths also created a leadership vacuum in the German command structure that took weeks to fill, during which Serbian forces launched successful offensives that recaptured significant territory. Within 6 weeks of Straub's death, German forces began withdrawing from several key positions in Serbia. The loss of experienced commanders like Brenner, Weber, and Straub had disrupted their tactical coordination and supply management. Local German commanders, fearing they might be next on a Serbian assassination list, became overly cautious and defensive in their strategies. The war in the Serbian theater ended 3 months earlier than military analysts had predicted. While Milunka's assassination mission wasn't the only factor in this outcome, historians later agreed that eliminating the 3 German commanders had significantly accelerated the collapse of enemy resistance. Her actions had saved thousands of lives by shortening the conflict. After the war ended, Milunka returned to her village as a decorated hero, but she never spoke publicly about the assassination mission. The official records listed the 3 German commanders as killed in action during routine military operations. Only a few high-ranking Serbian officers knew the truth about how the legendary female soldier had hunted down the men who tried to have her killed. Maria returned to Russia, where she continued fighting in the civil war that followed the revolution. The 2 women maintained correspondence for several years, sharing the bond of warriors who had faced death together and emerged victorious. They had proven that courage and intelligence could overcome superior numbers and resources. Years later, when historians studied the war's final phase, they noted the mysterious series of German command failures that had contributed to the conflict's end. They never discovered that these failures were the result of a peasant girl who refused to be intimidated by powerful enemies and who possessed the skill and determination to hunt them down one by one. Milunka Savic had entered the war to honor her brother's memory. She ended it by saving her own life and the lives of countless others, proving that sometimes the greatest victories come not from large battles, but from the courage of individuals willing to face impossible odds for the greater good.